because all of the presentations that preceded mine explained so many of the things that I wasn't able to get to, and probably so many of the gaps in the questions you'll have when you see this. So obviously most of you guys are going to know who these people are, but I want to see a show of hands as this backs out. How many people recognize where these pictures came from? Raise your hand. Winner. So these are from the original vinyl press of the White Album, and believe it or not, I found these under a dorm room bed when I was renovating a dorm room during summer as a part of a college work crew. And I recognized them right away, and I snatched them up because they're obviously very valuable. Now, I originally had all 4 prints, but you'll notice that George is conspicuously missing here. And his photo went missing, I don't know when, but my friends and I sometimes like to talk about what the Beatles would be like without George. I mean, technically, John played guitar, so they could have been a 3-man group, but I mean, what would that sound like? I don't know. Or let's put it a different way. What if you were the Beatles and you only have 3 people, and then someone said, hey, what if you could have a 4th Beatle? What if you could have a George Harrison in your band? What kind of things would you be playing or doing that you wouldn't even think about doing before? So for us, in our case, that person's name is Max. And he's a little off the screen here. But Max he's from Brazil. He works on my team as a prolific developer. He's our 4th Beatle. And today, in large part, the journey I'm going to describe to you today is one about enabling developers like Max, and that would go for employees and our ecosystem, to spend more time doing what they do best, which is to innovate. So here's the agenda. I won't spend a whole lot of time on it, but I'm going to tell you about the evolution of VMware APIs, our DevCenter Framework, why we built it, some of the major moving parts, and what we're up to next, and some of the things that we learned along the way. A little bit about me. Aside from getting dressed up and hitting people with sticks, I have a degree in lit and library science. I don't know what I'm doing as a product manager in a top 5 software company, but it's a great job, and I love being there. And I've been working on and off with developers and with VMware for quite some time. And I've been in this role as product manager for developer experience for about 4 years. And it's been a very long, arduous journey, and I'm actually feeling like we're at a great tipping point for developers and API in general, just looking across the room and seeing all the great things that are going on. So I will say I'm not the person who owns API integration or documentation. I am the person who is where the rubber meets the road, and docs are very important to my site's traffic. So a little bit about VMware APIs. In the beginning, we had vSphere, and we had a SOAP API, and then we had a CLI, and life was good. And then over the next few years, we grew a lot. And a lot more products, a lot more APIs, a lot more things for developers to play with. And then came along SaaS, Docker, AWS, all these disruptive technologies that really made us rethink our so-called private cloud or on-premises strategy. And we started to develop products like VMware Cloud for SaaS, VMware Integrated Containers for Docker, and Cloud Foundry actually is something we partner with and used to own, but they're another key player there. And today what you see is VMware is really pursuing a hybrid cloud strategy. And what does that mean? It means if you're running your product in the data center or in a public cloud, you should really running one data center. You shouldn't have an Azure data center and an AWS data center. And so our strategy is to make APIs and also documentation that enable the developers to create solutions that will operate in this hybrid cloud world. Now, for developers getting started with this technology, integrating this technology can be very daunting. Now, what you're seeing here is what I would consider a very basic software-defined data center integration diagram. And this is actually pretty basic. It gets a lot more complicated than this. And as all of the public and hybrid cloud solutions come into play, this big, giant, flying spaghetti monster gets even bigger. Now, what does all of this mean for us? Our growth has been pretty tremendous. I'm pretty happy to say that our traffic has grown, the number of users has grown, the number of people contributing content has grown. But that also means that our overhead has grown. And we had a ticket-based system for managing content on VMware Code prior to my arrival. And what does that mean? It means if you want to make a new web page, you file a ticket. and an engineer does it on your behalf or helps you do it. And we were getting overloaded with tickets. 25 to 30 is about average, but if you had a product launch, it's more like 70 to 100. Our developers, like Max, for example, were spending a tremendous amount of time handling tickets. This is basically an administrative job, but we were taking away top-notch developers from actual innovation to do sustaining work. And finally, the amount of time that it took to update or create a new page was just really not aligned with the rapid release cycles that your typical SaaS team is going to go through. If you think about it, 8 to 10 day publication window for a product that has an API that is updated twice a week, there's clearly a mismatch there. So this is a longitudinal view of where we knew we were headed. On the light blue, you're seeing the growth of our site, the traffic, the number of users and pages. And in the blue, you're seeing our funding model. And I took the light blue chart to my boss thinking I was going to get more funding, saying, well, we're going to break next year if we don't put more resources at it. And what I didn't realize at the time was a great opportunity was he said, why don't you think about trying to automate and streamline what we already have? And so that's what the direction we decided to go. So our solution for managing the complexity and the growth at scale and sustaining that is called the DevCenter Framework. In a nutshell, the framework essentially routes content through a set of common API services, basically microservices, and presents that to the user via any number of frameworks. If it's on the website, it could be Bootstrap. We also have, VMware makes a Angular-based UX framework called Clarity. It's just clarity.design if you want to check it out. And the way it works is that you take content from multiple sources. Maybe it's on GitHub, maybe it's from a blog, maybe it's from an internal repository like Perforce or whatever the TechPubs team happens to be using it. And it routes it through these microservices and delivers it to the user on demand on the website and a SaaS product, on an on-prem product. And this particular here was a challenge for us because of a number of products where a partner or an ISV or a developer, they might be working on specialized hardware. It's in a lab. It's not connected to the network. So a pure SaaS play solution is not going to work for them. Oh, so I'm going to talk about, I know there's a lot of moving parts here. I'm going to talk about three in particular. One is our API Explorer. The other is Sample Exchange. And then I'm going to tell you a little bit about our DExpress portal, which is for self-service content management. And by the way, I'm too afraid of live demos, so you're going to see a lot of canned demos. So let me show you a little bit about let me give you a glimpse of what the DevCenter looks like in action. What I'm going to show you is a canned demo here of the VMware Cloud on AWS DevCenter. As you can see here, there's a Developer Center tab where the user can see an overview, maybe go to the available APIs that are just for this service. So depending on the service you're in, the available APIs will change. We have Angular library that is a branded replacement for Swagger UI. You'll notice there you were actually being warned that you were hitting your data. So that the changes you make, the calls you try here actually do affect your environment. You can also get to related code samples, download SDKs, developer tools, things like that. So that's kind of what it looks like in action. Oh, and you get dark mode. Everybody's favorite. Lots of developer money being spent on dark mode. I'm sure it's all going to good use. Okay, so this is where we talk about herding the cats. Now, vSphere is our big cat on the block. It's at 12 plus APIs and growing. Some of them are SOAP, some of them are REST, some of them are proprietary, some of them are open source. It's a real hodgepodge. And then you have something newer like vRealize Automation, and this is more like a kitty litter. They have about 30 API services. Each of them is in a different Swagger JSON file. And some of it is SaaS, some of it's on-prem. It's really a mix. And then there's Workspace ONE. Now, if these two are very colorful, this is the freaking rainbow. They have 700 plus APIs, 5 Swagger docs, 3 or 4 different authorization models, including OAuth, which they're building in support for. And by the way, this is just for the automation APIs. This doesn't include the device integration APIs for iOS, Android, and so forth. So there's a lot going on there. And the question is really how to wrangle it. A lot of these teams were actually working in startup mode, codenamed silos, and they felt like the way that they were doing things was adequate. But at the end of the day, they knew as we did that customers and developers really needed a single source of truth for API documentation that went across our product stack. And it really broke across those silos. And so what you're seeing here is a very basic architectural diagram where, again, you're having a service, a microservice, that's pulling content from multiple sources and feeding it into multiple clients so that the developer gets ubiquitous, consistent access to this info. So this is another CAN demo. This is what the in-product experience looks like for API Explorer. This is very functional, and so you'll see a lot of the marketing material, business decision-maker material, and content is stripped out because this is something that is post-purchase being seen in the product. What you're seeing here is one of my favorite features. It's a live search where you can search for an operation or a method, and it'll expose the sub-content for deep linking. Another unexpected benefit we came across is when we put this in front of the users, we say, here's your API Explorer, and the immediate response was, well, this is really cool, but it's actually more than an API Explorer. This feels like more like an entire developer microportal. And that was kind of an aha moment for us because we realized that there was actually more value in delivering the entire experience. Okay. This is what we're working on right now, which is to integrate the new design into the website. And so we have a lot of APIs, as you know, a lot of different versions of APIs. Some people just want the newest, but some people do actually need material with historical value, especially if they're in a highly regulated industry. You have people that are working with APIs that we released 5-6 years ago. So I'll rush through this a little bit, but the point being, you see the same search features, and this is actually more valuable because you can conduct that deep linking search across APIs, which is great if you don't know the API you're looking for, but maybe you know the operation that you want to perform. Okay, let me skip past this. So the next piece of the puzzle for us is called Sample Exchange, and if you're not familiar with Microsoft TechNet or MSDN samples, this is basically a catalog of samples that is populated with content from VMware, but also our community. And what you're seeing here is a sample from Alan Renoff, who is one of our architects. And you can see here that this is pulling content from GitHub in a README file. You can actually browse the code if you're curious as to what's in the package. You can also view it on GitHub, of course. And then once you have, if you want to share the sample, for example, you can actually embed it like you would embed a YouTube video in a blog post or a forum. We're working on enhancing this even further so that you can directly access sample exchange services from other interfaces like Slack. You can watch things, you can favorite them. And, oh yes, and you can add your own samples. So when you want to add a sample, there's a number of different ways you can do it. You can link to your GitHub account, paste a sample. I like linking to the GitHub account because then it just fetches your repositories, and you can actually designate a specific file or folder to be the sample that you're contributing if you have a repository that has several samples in it. And you might give it some description, some metadata. If you include the right README file in your repo, it'll actually automatically pull that data. I'm not going to take you through the whole thing, but the basic gist is it takes about 2 minutes to get a sample on Sample Exchange. And if it's not already in your GitHub account, we populate our GitHub account with the content. So at the end of the day, this is a value add and a feature complement to GitHub. It's also our secret way of populating an open source repository. So I'll take you to the next slide here. Okay. This is another neat feature of Sample Exchange. You can actually syndicate an entire Sample Exchange on your own external website. And what that means is if you are like these folks on the vRealize operations team, and you have a very specific thing that you want to share, like these management dashboards, you can actually have a syndicated version of Sample Exchange on your website with just that category or just that content. And you can do this either categorically or dynamically based on metadata or hand curated. Okay, I've got about 5 minutes left, so I'm going to breeze through a lot of this stuff. We have a self-service content management system called DExpress, and the reason that we built this is because we were using 5 different software systems, 6 different people, and it took about 10 to 15 days to get content published. And what people said they wanted was something that was more like WordPress. So that's basically what we did. Now the real question is why we did it. And when we looked into the typical tasks involved, and of course you're uploading an asset, you're making a web page, you're reviewing and approving, but then there's also engineering tasks and inevitable email chatter. And what we found out is, so if you're going to make a new SDK page, it takes about 8 to 10 days. There are 2 help tickets on either side of that people had to file. But even when you account for both of those and the time it took to do the actual content management tasks, it really doesn't account for all the time. So we're like, where is all the time suck coming from? Well, it turned out that our users were getting stuck a lot, like at every step of the way. And they were filing more tickets, which of course meant more email. And then after the resolution, the person still had to do the task. And then they had to review it several times over and over again because it was taking so long. So with the new process, the actual content tasks take about 8 to 10 minutes. And even if you have lengthy review times and emails, the whole turnaround time is about 1 to 2 days, including any kind of white noise that comes from management and so forth. Now, what does that look like in action? So we actually put DXpress to the test in October. We had a vSphere 6.7 U1 release. It's kind of a big deal, I guess. A lot of docs, a lot of SDKs. This is probably the most notable change. This was 5 people before, and they were all on my team. Now they are all the content owners, and we didn't actually even touch it. So the overhead for us was basically 0. And the engineering team literally did go out on a team lunch and a movie while this was happening. That's how much confidence that we had in the system. So here's a little bit about what's next. We want to unleash the DevCenter Framework onto the website. And what that means is taking some of the things that we've learned and applying them to what I would call VMware Code 2.0. So you can see here, API Explorer and Sample Exchange now have the full clarity, look, and feel on the website, as well as the in-product experience. And then the DevCenter, this is a template you're seeing here. This essentially gives you a lot of the same features I just showed you in the in-product experience, but across all the products and on the website. Now, if you were looking at this in the product, there's probably some content that would be stripped out based on user preferences or based on the stakeholder preferences. So what you see up here, there's a custom directory. Some people call this core capabilities. This is where some of the business level marketing comes in. That's the kind of content that would probably be stripped out in the in-product version so that it's just focused on that one persona of the developer who's in doing mode. And what you're seeing here is just a quick overview of one of our platforms, AppTelligent. This is for mobile app developers. So, lessons learned. Validated research. I've heard a lot about doing research up front. I think that's great. This is a pretty common practice in startup product management. And the basic premise is fail forward fast, by validating your assumptions up front. And this means making sure you're talking to the right people, making sure that you have correctly identified their most pressing problems, and then putting a value proposition in front of them and validating that that solution actually addresses their most pressing problems. The next thing would be lean UX design. Now, this is kind of like user-centric design, but how can we do it faster? So if you're familiar with lean startup or running lean, this is basically lean applied to UX. And at the end of the day, what it means is you want to do iterative design, lots of prototyping, lots of learning as fast as possible based on feedback. One of the concepts I really liked, but I was ashamed to say out loud before, was this concept of pain-driven design. And it's actually really useful for ground field deployments. You've got a lot of users, and you could just tell they're pissed off in the kitchen, and you don't know why. And then you sit down with them, and you're like, okay, now I understand. That pain-centered design and pain-driven design was crucial to us, and it actually became my secret sauce at work. My bosses didn't realize I was doing this, but I went and interviewed, one-on-one interviews with every single person I could who was using our system. And I took them through a SurveyMonkey survey so that I could codify, structure it, keep myself from going over like I'm doing right now, and charted the results in SurveyMonkey, presented them to management. And that gave us the green light not only to work on the project, but to prioritize the features that we put into it, and also to have strong traceability so that we knew exactly why we were making these features. And all of that happened before we did any coding. Constant contact, this is probably the most important piece of the puzzle. The people I interviewed became our design partners, and when we released the product, they actually became our advocates and started selling it for us to other internal users who weren't sure about it or didn't know if they wanted to use it. It's very important to keep people involved and over-communicate. Relentless automation. This is something that actually affected our product map, speaking of feedback, because what we found was that for most people, WordPress is great, 3 steps is great, 10 minutes is great. But for some product managers, 3 clicks was 3 too many. And one comment I got was, you can't automate something by assigning it to somebody else. So this led us to add a CI/CD option for content. So this goes for API docs as well as programming guides. Anytime that they are approved and merged into a master branch, there's a build that automatically deploys the content. Sometimes we will deliver it to a staging site so that it can be checked. But automate, automate, automate is really the message I heard. And even at an enterprise, you would be surprised how many enterprises have many teams within the company that are basically operating like lean startups and may actually have fewer resources than some startups in a comparable position. Beware of dependency hell. This is a microservices issue, and it's also an issue working in a big company where you all try to be good corporate citizens and break down silos, and then you decide to use somebody else's Angular library, and then they decide to stop supporting it. Or you find out that they were using some upstream project that had a bug or stopped being supported, and then where are you? So personally, I kind of regret leaning on other teams for code, but there is value to it. You just have to be careful. And I would say even more importantly is to get agreements up front and set expectations up front with your collaborators inside a company. Sometimes it's easy to assume like, hey, we all work for the same company. We've got the same goals. We're all going to agree, right? No, get it in writing, get it up front. Make sure you're all aligned on what's going to happen. And then last but not least, and this is another caveat of a microservices architecture, do not over-engineer. We have one developer in particular who we like to say would build you a rocket ship to go to the grocery store. And it's an awesome rocket ship. It's got all the features a rocket ship could have, but it's not what I need. I'm just going to the grocery store. So be lean, be agile, make it when they complain about not having it, and you're good. All right, so here are some links you can learn more about code, read our newsletter, read our blog, wrangle some cats. And if you have any questions afterwards, want more information, have questions, or want to know about some of the books I mentioned, you can also do that as well. I'm here. Thanks.